Hello and happy Flat Earth Truth Tuesday to all within the sound of my voice. Welcome to the latest edition of Paul and the Plane Live here on Truth Frequency Radio, your protection from deception. I am your host, Paul and the Plane. Hope everyone is doing well. It's Tuesday at the time of this airing, Tuesday, April the 30th. Hard to believe the spring is upon us, and we're heading into the summer here in the northern hemisphere. Got a lot to catch up on when I get back from Ireland. As you guys know, I'm traveling right now, but a very special guest is with me, and I want to get right into the conversation. It is a gentleman known on YouTube online as Ranty Flat Earth, and absolutely been killing it for quite some time when it comes to observations and things of that nature. So, invited him to come on the show this week. For those of you that aren't exposed to some of his work, you've been missing out, and we're going to talk a little bit about the history there and what he's been doing, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So anyway, let's bring him right on to the show. I don't. This might be the first time he's been on Paul and the Plane Live. I know you've been on my podcast, Ranty. I guess is that what you want to go by, Ranty, or how should
Yeah, I
I even
mean,
what should I even call you?
well, my real name's called Shane, but Ranty's just as good. Everyone seems to call me Ranty that knows me online, so it just makes sense to just keep going with the flow, I think.
All right. Well, that sounds great. Yeah, and I know you got a story about kind of where that name came from, so you can kind of maybe share that too. But I just thought a couple guys here chatting Flat Earth for a couple hours here on a Flat Earth Truth Tuesday on TFR might be fun. So again, if you're listening to this, we won't be able to take any calls, interact with chat. This is a recorded show. It's currently about 2 a.m. in Ireland, so probably sleeping while this is playing. But for those of you that are listening live here on TFR, we appreciate it. Hope everyone's doing well. And thanks for joining us. So, Ranty, first of all, take us back a little bit. For those that haven't been kind of aware of some of the work you've been doing, we'll get into that. But I really want to just maybe have you spend a minute and just say, where did this name come from? I mean, you just been ranting about Flat Earth for a while now, I guess, huh?
Yeah, obviously there comes a period in someone's life when you wake up. For me it was 9/11, but it took a long time for me to actually to actually start a YouTube channel, and that was because when I went to university, they basically forced me to do a YouTube channel, and I had to put a video out. And I thought, actually, I enjoyed doing that. I enjoyed it, and then I thought, well, actually, I have things to say. I have things to talk about. I have things to discuss, like chemtrails. I want to discuss that. And, I see them all the time. And I remember them as a kid. We didn't have them. And I know I've seen them. And probably kids that are growing up now, 18, 20, 22, never were experienced to them. Well, they've never seen it with just blue skies and fluffy clouds. So, I wanted to talk about that. And I thought, well, am I just going to talk about it or am I going to rant about it? And then I ended up coming out with the name of Ranty Rant was the name, and I just thought it's a catchy name, and I thought, yeah, I'll just roll with it. And so that was my original channel. I think I'd put up about 400 videos about chemtrails, and obviously there comes a point when there's only so much you can talk about with chemtrails and stuff, and tried to diversify. I went a little too deep into subjects that perhaps I shouldn't have spoken about, including the Las Vegas shootings. And, something that I've learned now is that you don't talk about things when the narrative is being set. So if you're talking about things within the first couple of days, just as they happen, you're likely to get your channel shut down. And that's what happened essentially. So I had to start over again. And I'd literally at that point just stepped onto Flat Earth. So I found I didn't want to look at Flat Earth.
Yeah, give us a story. Give us a story. Everybody's got a very unique story. I mean, is this something that was, first of all, how'd you even hear it was a thing? And then secondly, what got you to finally look into it? Because I think for a lot of us, I'm not one of them, but I hear from most people that they're getting bombarded with it. They're like, no, I'm not going to look at it. It's stupid, dumb, absolutely retarded. And then it kind of wears you down. And you're like, okay, either I got to address this and debunk it, or just pure curiosity. Why is everybody talking about it? Or why do I keep hearing about it? What was your story?
Well, obviously at that time we had Alex Jones, who was, a very familiar face online. And I pretty much agreed with a lot of the stuff that he was putting out. And especially when he was talking about flat Earth, I thought it was just ridiculous. You know, he says that flat Earth, you know, you're insane to even think about it. And, you know, I fully agreed with him. But it got to the point where I'd almost run out of stuff to research and watch. And something popped up and something happened and a sequence of events happened that made me look into it. And what had happened is that Alex Jones had been demonetized on the platform on YouTube. And he was going on about it so bad. He really was making a big issue about how his channel had been demonetized and he was going to fight back and all this. And then the following day, a video popped out on Alex Jones's channel. And it was that fighter, I can't remember his name, not Joe Rogan, the other guy that associates with him.
I know you're talking about, the name escapes me as well.
Well, it says, whatever he was called, proves flat Earth. Oh, yeah. And then it showed that they were in a pub, you know, and it was like Paul Joseph Watson was there, and you know, he was asking just questions, you know, and he was just putting it out there. He wasn't really proving flat Earth, but the fact that the video was put out on his channel, Alex Jones's channel, sort of like was like, hang about, wait a minute, Alex Jones has been saying flat Earth is ridiculous. Next, he proves the flat Earth. I'm like, well, I'm watching this, so I watched it. And a few things, you know, ticked over. And I thought, well, maybe I'll look into that. And the following day, the video had gone off his channel and he'd been remonetized on YouTube and had all his backing back. And that was a sequence of events. And I
Very interesting, yes.
I was like, hang about, wait a minute, that makes no sense. Mm-hmm. That was really, that's when it was like, okay, then I'm going to look into this now. Because it just felt like he was like flexing his muscles and saying, well, if you're going to demonetize me, I'm going to talk about something you really don't want me to talk about. And I'm going to put a flat Earth video out. And I'm going to because you've seen how popular I am. And, you know, you've got all these conspiratards out there. Let's show them the flat Earth. Next thing, gets all his monetization back. And I was like, that's just worth looking into. And of course, once you start looking into it, you know.
You know, I've been hearing that it seems like some of the bigger channels, people that have big circles of influence, one of the reasons that Flat Earth is coming onto their radar, it appears, is because they are paying attention to censorship. And I know there's a couple of channels that have come up the last month or two where they're saying Flat Earth is worth looking into because there's an obvious attempt to suppress it. And if there's an obvious attempt to suppress it or slow it down or whatever that is, censorship, you know, in other words, then that means there's something to it. Some of these big channels. Now, they're not coming out and saying it's true, but they're saying it's worth checking out because of these strategies to keep it down. You know what I mean? And it sounds like that was kind of something that piqued your interest, and you're like, why is all this stuff going on behind the scenes? If this is so stupid, this is foolishness, then why the attempt to downplay it?
Yeah. And like I say, I mean, it was the strong arm, and it seemed like it was like a strong arm move by Alex Jones. That's the way it came across to me at the time. I sort of saw it for what it was, which was like, oh yeah, you're going to take my toy off me? Well, I'm going to say something that you really don't want me to talk about, and then you're going to give me my toy back. And he did. And I was like, hey. And like you say, with the censorship that's going on, it's absolutely insane. I mean, if you search Flat Earth on YouTube, the first 10, 20 pages or so are all of debunking videos. There's no actual Flat Earth proofs on there. There's no globusters, there's no Jeranisms, there's no Nathan Oakleys. There's none of that. You know, and it's like, why is that? Why is it all just debunking stuff? Why are they? You can't even type Flat Earth. You know, when you type Flat Earth into YouTube, it gives you. You start typing flat, then you go to Earth, and you get to the T and the H, and it doesn't give you in your drop-down box. So it only gives you the options to do Flat Earth debunked or whatever. So unless you actually just type Flat Earth and then hit Enter, you don't actually get that little drop-down thing that you can just click to Flat Earth. So that's really weird.
It's unusual. Yeah, for any other topic, it's going to be different for sure. I think that, you know, that got to keep people from accidentally stumbling upon it too. You know, it seems like, you know, or at some level that's going on. So And you're right. Once your interest is piqued and you decide to really look into it, I think anybody that is intellectually honest, or really cares about the truth, isn't going to stop at the Vsauce video where he throws out 10 absolutely pseudoscience items or whatever. That I mean, people I think smart enough to see through that, and they're going to start digging in and realize, okay, well, I see what the mainstream thoughts are when it comes to flat Earth, but why do I keep hearing about it? How come there's so many people that are, maybe my friend or my buddy, or I see this stuff on Facebook or whatever? Why is it such a thing? There's got to be some substance there. I'm just curious. Then you start looking into it and you start pulling up some videos or some websites that are giving some evidence for it. And then you're going, oh, I'm curious. So what was it for you when you started coming across that sort of information to get you go, all right, there's some more validity here than maybe what meets the eye?
Well, it's a little different for me because it didn't take me very long to realize that I had an opportunity to test this for myself, because where I live, it's very close to the sea, and I have a lot of objects and things around here that are easily visible from different locations. It's a great place to live. I can travel to North Wales or to Southport or to Hoylake, and I can see Blackpool Tower, and it's a great reference point. It's always well lit. I can see it from 30 miles away. I can do some calculations. We've also got wind turbines that are out. We've got barrowing furnace over here. It's a beautiful place. And I knew straight away from watching, I think maybe just a handful of videos, and it wasn't any of the big stuff. It wasn't the 200 proofs or stuff like that. For me, it was just, what can I see? And I was watching videos about people saying they could see further than they should on the globe Earth. And for me, that was like, okay, I am now going to go buy a P900. Or no, I didn't even know I was going to buy a P900. I just wanted to find a camera that could see the furthest. So I started doing some research, found the P900 could see the furthest, bought it. So within 2 weeks of me literally stumbling on flat Earth, I bought a P900 and I was out there. I think my first observation was from Southport looking at Blackpool. Then I went a few other places, and Tony Anthony Riley, Sleeping Warrior, he got in touch with me about an observation I'd done about Blackpool. He didn't have a P900 at the time, but he asked me would I go along and help him do another observation of it and see whether or not we could see it from his location, which we did. And that was the start of it, really, because that was just 29.3 miles. I mean, I'm very mathematical and analytic, and I'm very careful with what I do and make sure that I try to take every detail down. So when we went to Hoylake, I noted the tide times, the height above sea level, everything like that, the distances, had it all down, and we were seeing far, far more of Blackpool than we should have done on the globe Earth. And essentially from then, you are kind of hooked.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those people that are listening that aren't aware that there's math here, that's one thing that I think a lot of people that are that are hearing about this, they're like, well, obviously you just probably flunked kindergarten, if you think that the Earth is flat. But when you start throwing the math out there, and that's something that I think there is no answer for, and that is very simply, if the spherical Earth is of a certain size, a circumference, right, of 24,901 miles, then we should be able to predict and measure and verify that size with these observations, right? I mean, so take somebody through that's new. How are you calculating how much curve there should be?
Okay. Well, I'm trying to find something that's round. There's a bottle top. Don't know if you can see that. There's a bottle top. So let's
on TFR here, it's audio only, but yeah, we'll also I'm recording this video at the same time, so we'll be able to. You'll just have to talk through it in a very detailed way.
Okay. Right. Well, you have a sphere or a ball. Let's say it's a football or anything like that, and as you pick the football up in both hands, you have one hand on the side of the ball and you have another hand on the other side of the ball. And if you imagine that each hand was trying to look at the other hand, they couldn't see the other hand because there would be a ball in the way.
Right.
Ball up. So you can't see it. Hand can't see the other hand. but they're connected. And essentially that's what the globe model is trying to say, is that you have people in Australia and you have people in the UK, and they're on opposite sides of the world, and they can't see each other because they have the Earth in between. Well, there is a mathematical formula. It's roughly 8 inches per mile squared, and that's the formulation for setting off at point A, going around the circumference of the Earth, and ending up back at the position that you started. And if you put that into calculation, it basically works out, if you go for 1 mile, if you had a flat surface, well, let's say it differently. If where you're stood, if you walk 1 mile away, you have actually gone around the curvature of the Earth by 8 inches. So if you was to place a camera at your feet and try to look at somebody 1 mile away, 8 inches of their body or human, up to the calves, let's say, of the legs, would have been gone or lost to Earth curvature. And then if they go another mile away, it's 32 inches. Now that's quite a drop. 32 inches is quite a way. You're talking what, almost 3 feet. So almost half of the human would have disappeared at 2 miles away as they go around the curvature of the Earth. When you get to 3 miles, they've vanished. Your 6 foot human will have gone completely, and that is he's making his way around the Earth, and that's the formula that you can mathematically work out, and you can keep on doing that, and eventually you'll end up coming around the whole circumference of the Earth back to square one, and that's what they tell us.
That's what they tell us, and you're right. It's exponential, so you're not just doing 8 inches per mile, because that would be a slope, right? That would just be a slope, and because the further away you're getting, we should, using pure logic, if we're on a sphere, wherever we're standing, the Earth should drop away from us in all 4 directions, front, left, right, and behind us at the same rate. If it's a perfect sphere. Now they say it's an oblate spheroid, so there might be a few millimeters here and there, right, that might affect that if that were the case. But essentially, you get so many miles away, and you shouldn't be able to see objects. And we can do this, and should be able to predict this with math, roughly. I believe it's like 7.98 or something like that. If you want to get technical. And this is, for everybody listening, this is spherical.
Geometry.
This is spherical geometry. This is not, and this is the globe Earth math. This is not something that the flat Earth community or flat Earth research community came up with. This is essentially saying, they say the Earth is this big, with this big of a this size of a circumference. Therefore, at this distance, here's what should be the drop, etc. So if we have an object that's so many feet tall at so many miles, we should be able to determine if there's a curvature there, as predicted by the globe. So I'm just trying to break this down to real simple, again, without a whiteboard, without illustrations. So now that we've kind of established that, let's talk about this first observation that you said that you were making. How far away is or was Blackpool?
Well, the first time that I did a proper observation, and I say that and means that I actually knew what I was doing. The first observation I ever did, I went to Southport and I saw Blackpool Tower, and I was like, hey, I can see Blackpool Tower. I didn't really, I put this video out and I was like, yeah, we can see Blackpool Tower. And then I came across the curve calculator after I'd published the video. And there was a lot of people that said, yeah, well, it matches the curve calculator, blah, 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 blah. So I was like, oh, right, okay, well, maybe, it's first go, novice, new to this, I'm just excited about P900. Okay. But then Tony got in touch with me. So the first real observation we did was from Hoylake. So the distance from my observation to Blackpool Tower, the base of Blackpool Tower, was 29.3 miles away. So close to 30 miles away. It's a good distance. It's longer than a marathon across the ocean. So we have we have a body of water, and we all know that if we're going to do any kind of testing, the best thing to do a test across is water, simply because if we live on a sphere, that water, that liquid, has to curve simply by the fact that if you believe in the globe model, gravity is pulling it to its center. And because it's pulling it to its center, everything is being curved, including the ocean. So 70% of the Earth is water, which means that the water has to be curving. Land, okay, there is areas of land that we know are flat, right? But water being a liquid has to form a curvature if we believe we live on a sphere. So if we have a geometry or mathematical geometry for the curvature of the Earth, we can apply that to the water that we're looking across. And we should always encounter the same amount of blockage. It shouldn't, gravity isn't or should not be selective. It should be constant, in which case we can have a constant amount of gravitational curve to that water, and we can detect it, we can measure it, we can, if we see it, if we can look across some water and we see an object that should be behind the Earth curve, we have to address that, and we have to say, well, why is this? Why are we seeing it? And the globe model has a response for that. Us flat earthers, we see it because it's there, it's flat, it's stationary, we can see things.
Very good. So appreciate that. Very good explanation. And you're exactly right. The best observations when we're trying to measure or observe alleged curvature of the Earth would be over water. No obstructions. There should be no obstructions. If anything, we should just experience that that bulge, if you will, some people will call it, of water, and the objects that are beyond the curve should not be able to be seen. So I just did a quick calculation. So 8 inches per mile when you square the miles, right? Because it's exponential. So the further away, the bigger the drop. So we're going to take 29.3. We're going to square it, and then we're going to multiply it by 8 inches. So I come up with a little more than 6,800 inches. So I need to put that into feet. At least here in the U.S., we use the imperial system, and sometimes I can't do it in metric because I don't have any frame of reference. Not as good a frame of reference. So 572 roughly feet.
Yeah.
So anything at that distance that was less than 572 feet, the tower, let's say, should not have been seen at all.
Well,
what did you observe?
Well, here's the thing. Obviously, we know that if you increase your elevation, you can see further, and it's the same as on a globe. So if we did live on a globe, if we increase our elevation, we also have to adjust the maths slightly. So we have to account for that, to take into account the increased elevation, which will allow us to see more around the curvature, if that's the case. So obviously, taking into account that, I realized some data needed to be input into my actual height above sea level. So my actual height, let me just put it in so I can recall back now, was 22 feet above actual sea level. So what we'd done, we'd been there during the day, and I'd filmed at high tide. So I knew at exactly high tide where it came up to on the seawall, on the ramp. And then when we filmed at low tide, we knew obviously what time low tide was, and we could work out the difference. So we knew that, because obviously we were looking at, it wasn't just a tide, we're looking across an area of quicksand. So I actually went out onto the damn quicksand and started getting stuck in the quicksand with my P900. I'd walked out about 400 feet. I got a video of it somewhere, and I'm literally up to my knees in this quicksand as I'm sinking and trying to make my way back to the shoreline.
Trying to keep your electronics from getting wet.
And
this isn't the Bahamas, right? So the water might be a little chilly.
That's true. That's true. Well, so if we're going to be technical about the observer height, we're talking 22 feet distance, 29.3 miles. So in that case, with the new data inputted, we're talking of a geometric hidden of 370 feet. Now, Blackpool Tower is 527 feet tall, but it's also on a platform which is about 8 meters above actual sea level. Then you have to increase the fact that that's at high tide. You have to lower that down as well. So you're
kind of getting into Yeah, you're getting into the technical stuff, and I want to dive into that. But we got to take a break real quick.
Yeah.
So we're going to pause right here. I want to remind everybody we are chatting with Ranty Flat Earth here on Paul and the Plane Live on Truth Frequency Radio. So this is going to be awesome because there's some other stuff we're going to get into. We're going to get into technical stuff and the curve calculator, and then what I think we're going to spend the balance of our time today, which I know you are, I would consider you an expert in because of all of these observations, is how the atmospheric conditions are going to affect what we see. So don't go anywhere, everybody. A lot more with Ranty Flat Earth here on TFR. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back in about 3 minutes. This is a recorded broadcast, so hope everybody is enjoying so far my conversation with Ranty Flat Earth. Gentleman over in England, and been doing some observations for quite some time over some pretty large distances. And what we've been talking about so far is just kind of very simply the math behind the spherical Earth and being able to predict that, being able to use it to measure and make observations around to verify it, basically, to verify if the Earth is indeed 24,901 miles of circumference, as we are told. And before the break, we were talking about really the first main observation that Ranty and Anthony Riley, Sleeping Warrior, you guys kind of teamed up, and you were looking at a tower that was 29.3 miles away, and you were kind of getting into the technical side of things now, saying, okay, well, obviously the curve calculation of 8 inches per mile squared would be basically assuming the camera or the eye was right at sea level, right? So as you then stand up, right? So let's say you're 6 feet tall and you're standing right on the edge of the shore. You need to take that into account. And we're going to talk a little bit about why, some people will say, well, if you're raising your observer height, well, that means you're able to see further over the curve. Well, that would obviously be the case on a sphere as well. But what we're finding, and we'll talk about this, is increasing the angular resolution to the eye or the camera also allows you to see better. And that can explain that as well. But anyway, let's get into this. So you said you were about 22 feet above sea level at the time of this observation. And then the tower was started so far above sea level and that sort of thing. So you had to take all this into account into your calculation. Please continue.
Yeah. So, it wasn't all to do with what we could see and what we couldn't see, because there's obviously a limit to what we can see. And we're finding that out now, actually. Back then, we didn't have all of that data that we know of now. But one thing that did stand out is that there was a few objects that were visible in the footage that should not have been visible on the sphere. Not only were we seeing far more of Blackpool Tower than we should have, we were also seeing the lights at the top of like a ride that's on Central Pier. They have two lights because it's quite high. It's like 100 feet high. So they have to have these lights on because it's near Blackpool Airport, so that the planes don't fly into them. Sure. And then also we had the mirror ball. Now the mirror ball is like a 30-foot wide ball of lights. Like it's got like 30,000 little reflective mirrors on it, and it spins around and light shines on it, and it creates like a fantastic light show. Well,
is that where Def Leppard got their name for their album?
Possibly.
Well, I know they're from England, so I was just curious. Anyway, I'm dating myself now. I love Def Leppard in the '80s. Anyway, so this is 30 foot wide, so you'll be able to see this pretty far.
Well, this is 30 foot wide, and its elevation above actual sea level at that time was only about 50 feet. So it was only about 50 feet above sea level, and we had it in the footage. It was slightly nearer, by virtue of the angle that we were looking at it. It was slightly nearer by about 1.5 miles or so, but it didn't make an awful lot of difference. The fact that we were seeing it at, a huge distance, right, was, it not only just shocked me, but to actually triangulate it and prove that that was the object we were seeing, was brilliant. I mean, me and Anthony Riley went on about this for quite a while. It's quite a well talked about observation, specifically from the globe point, which was why couldn't we see the street lights? And obviously we were saying, well, obviously we weren't bright enough. And why can't you see the Tower Ballroom lit up? Well, we couldn't see the Tower Ballroom lit up because it didn't have any lights on it. That's the structure that the tower sits on. So we, because they were saying it should be lit up, it was never lit up. So there was a bit of back and forth, but essentially their argument was this was refraction. Refraction was causing the light to curve around the shape of the Earth from point A into the camera lens and then rearrange itself so it just looks like we're looking at it. Yeah, it's just nonsense.
That was my, yeah, exactly. It's got to be, and that's the reaction I think a lot of people, well, I guess if you're just exploring this at the beginning, you're hearing refraction and you're like, well, I guess if you don't care about the truth, then you just dismiss it and say, oh, well, that explains it, and it's a ball, and I'm going to go back to the game and have a beer or whatever. But I think for those of us that were like, well, light is bending around a curve, gravity, what are these things that are causing that, and then is that something that we can potentially model to prove? Because if that's the case, then that would be quite a natural phenomenon. So, and I know this is where you have gone to be able to really dive into these topics, especially when it comes to refraction, because I think so many people just dismiss it and say, oh, it's just refraction. But tell us more than what have you found when it comes to that subject specifically, because you can't explain away these things just by saying refraction.
Well, okay, so let's put it this way. In the globe model, they believe that light has an ability to go around a curve. So essentially, let's put it like this. If you were standing on one side of a hill and somebody else was on the other side of the hill, due to some atmospheric conditions, at certain times, you should be able to see the other person on the other side of the hill because they would be loomed up like a floating mirage, like, what's that woman called? Mary Poppins with her umbrella, when she floats up into the sky and goes, hello, yeah, just like that, miraculously loomed up into your eye line so you can see it. So you're seeing around the curvature of the Earth. I mean, that's what the globe model says. I mean, I've never, ever seen evidence of that in my entire life. And
they use that term, don't they? Looming.
Yes.
That's the word that they use.
Well, back before I started on a lot of research last year, but back before we started on this research, before I started on this research, we'd also done an observation, or Tony had, from St. Bees looking at the Isle of Man. And he'd seen something called floaty land. He described it as floaty land. They described it as looming. So whatever we were seeing, it was being loomed up. And the idea of looming is where you get the same color of the sky underneath the object that you're looking at. So it looks like it's floating in the sky. Yeah. So their explanation for seeing that object is that it's being loomed up. And our object is like, well, no, I just think we're just seeing it and there's something else going on there, And we call that, obviously, it's an inferior mirage. So we had to understand what is the inferior mirage.
Yeah. So. Yeah, exactly. I think anybody that's, looked through a telescope or a camera or whatever, long distance over water knows what you're talking about, where it appears the boat or the land or whatever is floating. Yeah. And it's because we get the reflection of the sky, off the water and that sort of thing. So I know you've been doing then a lot more work and your point about two people on either side of a hill is valid, because I think anybody that lives by the coast or a coast like you do, and you're used to looking across it, there are times of day when you can see things, and there are times of day when you can't see things. There are times of night when you can see things, and other nights where you can't. So there's some changes going on. To say that it's not the atmosphere affecting what we can see is, it's pretty foolish to say that, because you could look at a time lapse of a camera, taking some video footage across the bay or something, and see the land appear to go up and down, and mountains in the distance to appear to raise and lower, and this sort of thing. And it looks like houses are floating and not floating. So there's a lot of factors that need to be taken into consideration. Can you kind of break that down for us?
Well, what you're describing there is basically just stretching and shrinking of the object. You never actually see an object reappear from behind another object. So when we're talking about Skunk Bay, what you see is the stretching. So you see the land rise up, rise down, rise up, rise down, but you never see Anything other than that, you just see stretching of what you can actually see, right? You can see it. It's always in the image. Nothing else appears that you shouldn't expect to see. It's not like you've got another tree that's hiding behind a landmass that suddenly appears in Skunk Bay footage like it's being loomed up. It doesn't happen. All you just see is stretching and warping and a bit of distortion. There's never been any examples of looming as far as, or refraction of anything that I can ever find. And I have 4 terabytes of data that I've collected recently, over the past 18 months or so. And one of those particular sets of data that I looked into was specifically, there is a post, it's a navigational buoy, but it's a post, it's actually fixed into the actual ground. And I go to the same location on the railings at the top of the Anchors Home slipway. So I can go to Anchors Home, I can stand, hold my camera on the exact same spot every single time, film the buildings of Barrow, which are 18.3 miles away, and this post is only 4 miles away. So I have a reference point, a constant reference point between.
This is very key. This is very key to making these calculations, isn't it? Having 2 points, one known and the other one then being able to observe. This is great stuff.
So I have my exact location, which can never change. So I can stand in it. So I literally hold the camera under my left hand and place it on the railings, so it's always at the same height. Then I film directly at the yellow and black buoy, which is fixed into the water at 4 miles away. And then directly behind that, in a direct line, we have the buildings of Barrow. Now, I have got footage upon footage. I have probably 100 videos of the same thing. And I have never, ever once seen the buildings of Barrow in a different relative position to the post in the foreground. So the post in the foreground is always in exactly the same position as viewed to the buildings behind, which tells me that those buildings are never looming up or going down. They're always just staying in the same place. And that's important because my observations from just 1 inch and 1 foot looking across that 18 miles of water has shown complete flatness. So when I've gone down to the beach, and I've gotten down and dirty, got into my hands and knees and onto my belly, and and I'm filming these buildings in the distance, literally from 18.3 miles away, observation 1 inch. All of those buildings should be gone, but they're still visible, and that is showing that we were seeing no curvature in this location where I am. And if I'm not seeing curvature here over the water, so it's not conforming to the gravitational pull of the Earth, then who's to say that it's happening anywhere else? Is it just being selective here? That it's just choosing not to pull on the water and make it curve? No, it just always presents itself as flat. And a lot of people were saying, well, it's just looming, those buildings are looming. So that's why I wanted to talk about that, because they were saying it was looming and refraction. I then decided to do a complete test to put that theory to the test. Well, are these buildings looming? Well, the post says no. Post says no. What can I say? If the post says no, there doesn't seem to be any looming there. And I've gone further than that. I've gone as far as 24 miles and more, literally looking across this stretch of water and seeing these buildings that are only, the tallest one there is only like 170 feet above sea level. You're just seeing them. But what you do see is you see them being compressed. The further away you go, they get compressed.
So that's the atmospheric conditions then, right? Humidity, temperature, if there's some wind, over the water that's causing some spray, and that's, creating a layer of distortion. In the FE core, chats, I think, the non-uniform density transition zone, or NUTS, is what they kind of call that layer of air that's just above the water, where these distortion, these things that affect our vision, whether you're looking at it with the naked eye or you've enhanced it, by magnifying it with the camera. That's just what's going to determine how clear you can see those buildings. And here's the point, or the objects that you are observing from that distance. They're constant. They're staying there. They're not moving. Water always, the surface of water always is measuring completely flat. The surface of water is always measuring completely flat. The only variable is the air that's just above the water,
Yeah.
what that's going to do and how it's going to what it's going to allow us to see or observe. And that is as you and this is what I think you're where you're headed is that depending on those conditions, what you have observed is not that the water is essentially cutting off the bottom, but essentially the bottom, maybe a couple of floors of a hotel or a building or wherever that you're looking at are actually compressed,
Mm.
right? And
Yeah.
then once you get above that layer of air that is distorted, then you're seeing what you would expect to see. Looking at the distance, I think Dr. John Dee did a great job of taking some observations across, and it wasn't quite the same distance, but he was looking at some very large buildings across the south coast of England, and he could see that the very bottom layer was being compressed. But once you get above that layer, right? I think he does it. I think he does it at 3 meters above the
Yeah.
tide. You could see that it was equidistant again. Um,
Yeah.
all of the different floors. And if it was, if they were different, it'd be a different story. But completely logical to say, okay, well, the air is affecting the first two layers there and compressed it into basically a thin line that we can't even really make out. And above that, the building is looking as normal. But the building itself never lowered or was raised up. And I think that's your point. I'm trying to put it into words without obviously having anything
Yeah.
to show visually speaking, but that's what I'm hearing from you. So correct me where I'm wrong, but that's my take on it.
No, no, you're quite correct. I mean, there's from my experience, there's only ever four results that I ever see when I go down to the to do these observations. We either see things a very long way away, we either get complete blockage where we don't see anything. So, in fact, for this entire year up till yesterday, we had a complete whiteout. There was nothing we couldn't even see 6 miles. Didn't matter. Every single day I went down. Every single day couldn't see
Well,
more
the
than
Earth
six
got
miles.
really small during that time period, so the curve was just really, really prominent.
I actually think that was the chemtrails, seriously. And I did a video, I think yesterday, just surmising that because what we'd had an awful lot of chemtrails going over all year. We hadn't had any thunderstorms, nothing, no rain, and it just felt like the onslaught, this buildup of the chemicals in the air was just floating, just staying there. And it looked like a constant mist all year long. I'm not the only person to have seen it. But then the day before yesterday, I think it was, there was this massive thunderstorm. Went down to the beach the next day, first day of the entire year, we were able to see stuff. So it seemed like it cleared the air, and it was my assumption that the rain had sort of captured these particles and just pulled them into the ocean, got rid of them, dispersed them. Can it be proven? No, but it can't be more than a coincidence, surely, that the entire year we've had no visibility, and then all of a sudden that happens. But so there's only the four things that we ever see. We see things further than we should. We don't see anything at all. We either see an inferior mirage on something, or we see compression. That's the only four things we ever envisage when we're looking over water. That's four things. And it used to be that the inferior mirage was the glober's proof of where you see that inversion line, that center part. That was where the curvature of the Earth started, and that was always their position, had been for as long as I could remember. I always, from my experience of doing this kind of research, thought that was a fallacious argument and wanted to look into it, wanted to do some research on that. And if you want to talk about that later, we're sure to get into that as well, because it's very interesting what's happened and transpired recently about that.
Yeah,
Literally, I've taken that toy away from the Globers.
I'm sure they're not happy about that. So the defenders of the globe, yes, and I want to get into that because I know you are not afraid to get down and dirty and get in there and have those conversations with them. So one thing I admire about you is your willingness to engage on a regular basis because it can be exhausting, mentally exhausting for sure. So let's get into that in the second half of the show because the stuff that's been going on recently is definitely something I think we should talk about. But after all these observations, you said about 18 months, you've been really working hard in this area, taking, like you said, terabytes of footage that you have, you've recorded with your cameras. I mean, how many times has anybody provided a video evidence to prove that it's that there's curvature, because you would think after all that you've been able to put out there, you'd think that if there was some validity to a globular Earth with this size of that's 24,000, almost 25,000 miles in circumference, there should be some weather conditions that would allow a defender of the globe at this point now to prove at some level, or at least provide some evidence that would force those of you that are really researching this to take a step back and go, that's weird, that doesn't reconcile with my observation. You would think that that would come up from time to time. Has it?
Well, the biggest proof for the globe, as far as I can say optically, seems to always be their assertion that a boat goes over the curvature of the Earth. And it has to be said that there is footage out there that does appear to show boats behind a solid wall of water, right? So you can watch this boat disappear behind a area of water, and it clearly is water. It's not atmospheric distortion. You're watching this happen in real time.
You're seeing half the boat, right? You're seeing like you can see the mast or whatever, or the cabin or whatever, but majority of the hull. Legitimately, observationally, you're seeing that. So walk us through that, because that comes up, doesn't it?
Well, I'm not afraid to address that. You see, I mean, the Globers say that's their proof, and then it got me thinking. Well, what is going on with the topography of the land underneath the water? Is that having an issue with what's going on? Well, we've got things like tidal bores that happen when they get pushed up into a narrow inlet or river. So we know that that can artificially increase the height of the vertical height of the water in that location. So it will cause an artificial or a localized bulge in that area. So if a tidal bore can do that and riptides can do that, what about boats? Well, then you look into boats and you think, well, boats need a channel to go down. So often you have shallow areas where they would get beached. So they have to go down these narrow channels that they have to follow because they're deep enough until they get into the deeper ocean. Well, what happens when and they only ever seem to set off during high tides because they need the elevation of the water to set off. So then you look at the topography of the land under the water and you find that there's often quite a slope that drops off before so you've got the shallows, then you've got a steep slope that drops off.
Yeah.
Well, what happens when the tide pushes in there? You're funneling tide pressure, and all this water movement is being pushed against a resistance, which is the slope. The slope is resisting the force of this water. So, is that going to have an effect on the vertical height of the water in that specific location? So, let's just say over a period of 200 or 300 meters in width, it's possible that this push of water as the tides are moving in and out is actually going to create a localized bulge in that area. And it only has to be a couple of feet. And that will be your blockage. As the boat disappears into the distance, it gets further away, it starts to shrink its angular size, so it gets smaller due to perspective. That 2 foot that 2 foot hump, that localized hump where the tide's pushing in, will be the blockage. It isn't the curvature of the Earth. Can that be proved? Well, yes. I actually got in touch with a guy who studies all kinds of tidal stuff, barotropic tides for one. He's agreed that increases the area in certain locations by several centimeters. So this is the first guy that I've been in touch with, and he's actually there and then providing evidence that the water lays level for the most part, but where the topography of the land and the slope meets the shallows, we are getting localized bulging. And that will cause obstruction.
Interesting. Yeah, well, that makes sense. And I can see that, when the water is moving, there's the potential that there's going to be different layers of water. So yeah, water if left undisturbed is where I want to characterize my earlier comments. Water left undisturbed, obviously, is always going to measure flat on the surface, is always going to measure flat. There's not going to be any curvature to it. But as water is moving, yeah, potentially you've got these potential points that are going to block things. We've only got about about 2 minutes left here. So let's wrap up the first half of the show. When it comes to ships over the horizon or over the curve, which seems to come up still, even in these times after so many observations have been made to show that water always levels, the surface always measures level or flat. look, we can't see curvature from 35,000 feet, but you can see it from 3 miles when the ship is going away. That doesn't reconcile. The other thing that I think might have something to do, and I want to get your take on this, quickly before we go to our next break, is when you're looking through the camera telescope and you see maybe half of the boat, that water that's blocking it, it doesn't appear to be the water that is right in front of the boat. It is a lot closer. And so I think it's been magnified, and if you look at kind of a profile, obviously what the camera or telescope is doing is magnifying or increasing the resolution to your eye with the lens. And so the water is that's in front of it. All of that water between you and the boat is being magnified. And so that's going to be appearing larger. Again, it's perspective. And that's what we're kind of getting at here.
Well, yeah, well, the whole reason I started looking into the topography line was essentially I was filming Barrow from the same location, 18.3 miles away, and always seeing flat. I went nearer, so I went a bit further up the coast, a couple of miles nearer, and I started filming from that location, which was basically across the estuary mouth, and I was seeing blockage. And I was literally seeing the water obscure the buildings of Barrow and the lighthouse and everything, and I didn't know what to say. I couldn't understand it. I needed to do some research. So I did the research. I then found that you get tidal bores in that location, specifically across the one point where I was looking at and seeing blockage. And that made me think, well, if it's happening in this location, maybe it's happening in other locations too. And that's when I started looking into the tides, and yeah.
There we are. All right. Well, let's pause right there. This is awesome stuff. We got a lot more to cover in the second half of the show, so don't go anywhere. Ranty Flat Earth and Paul on the Plane talking about water and curvature and boats and with a lack thereof. So don't go anywhere. We'll be back in about 3 minutes again. Hope you're enjoying the show tonight. Listen to Paul on the Plane Live on Truth Frequency Radio. Well, welcome back to the second half of Paul on the Plane Live here on Truth Frequency Radio, the 30th of April. We're recording this a few days before that. But hope you're enjoying the show tonight. Thanks for hanging around with us for hour number 2. My guest tonight is Ranty Flat Earth. If you're not aware of his work, very simply, go to YouTube, search Ranty Flat Earth, and you're gonna find a lot of these observations and videos that we've been talking about really broken down. So it's great for somebody. Ranty, I think you probably had a lot of people that you got a P900 or that live kind of around you that are going, hey, I want to do some of this myself, because that's exactly what I did when I started hearing, hey, we're seeing too far, and seeing some of the work like what you've done. That's what I did. I went out and bought a P900, and I went to Lake Tahoe on the California-Nevada border, and 18 miles, looking for casinos on the opposite shore, and starting to do that myself. That's what we have to do, right? And you did that as well. You didn't say, oh, okay, and just take it at face value. You had to go out there, roll up your sleeves, get wet, get dirty, and prove it to yourself, right? And that's what you decided to do, and that's great.
Well, it wasn't just proving it to myself as well. It was proving it to an audience. And back in the day, I had a small channel because I'd started over again. And I first went on Ice in my house skis and was talking to some people in there. Of course, back then it was a lot of the Globers used to frequent these debate platforms. So of course you get shouted down a lot, and it's all mathematical and it can be explained. And the more they said that stuff, the more I wanted to prove them wrong. And I ended up going on Nathan Oakley's debate, and through their support and their channel, because he has quite a large channel, he has quite a lot of viewers that watch his stuff in the live debate. It was a good place to actually show this stuff and talk it through and debate it, not only with the panelists that are for the flat earth, but for the globe earthers too. So I got their input, and this is when I found out that the globers had a religion of when you see an inferior mirage, yeah, that's the curvature of the earth, that's where the curve starts. Yeah, so it's blockage, the blockage there that you can't see at the bottom of the boat, you can't see at the bottom of the building, that inferior mirage, that mirror area, that's where the curvature of the earth is. And I was determined to prove them wrong with that, and I've done it successfully.
Let's get into that, because I think if you're just new to this and you hear, boats going over the horizon, what we observe prove that we live on a sphere. And then you go and watch some videos and somebody will show, half of a boat. you could just hit stop and go, well, I guess that's it. I guess they're right. You took it a step further, and I'd love to hear, and I know the folks that are listening too would love to hear how you combated that. What did you find? What were you able to test to show that where that blockage is not where the curve starts?
Well, it was pretty easy actually. I'd obviously got a lot of data, and I was encountering days when I was getting a lot of inferior mirage, and I was getting days where I could see an awful long way. So on the days when I could see an awful long way, so same place on the railings, same tide height. So obviously I was doing it at low tide, so roughly around about 2 meters above actual, well, 2 meter tides to say 1 meter tide. High tides at 9 meters. So it's a low tide, I'm on the railings, same spot looking at Barrow and Furnace. Days that I can see absolute flatness, days when I get an inferior mirage. So I had a location at the distance between myself and it, and that was a small area of land to the left part of Barrow and Furnace, and it has a little spire on the top. It's like a radio mast, very obvious feature. And so I filmed it quite a lot, and I would see it in beautiful, crystal clear 4K conditions. So I've got my camera, I've got a P1000 at this point. So I'm seeing all of that landmass, which, let me just tell you, should be behind Earth curve, right? Because the distance to it and my elevation above sea level means that essentially about 45 feet or so should be hidden to Earth curve. Well, it's only 50 feet high, so I might have seen the very, very tippy tops of it, but I'm seeing right down to the bottom. I'm seeing the sand, I'm seeing the sand. So I've got plenty of footage of that. And now on other days, I've got inferior mirage, and I've got this inferior mirage, same time of day, same height, the same tide heights. I'm very careful with showing you the tide heights in the same footage. So I've got the inferior mirage, and it is cutting off all the bottom of those buildings. Well, that landmass. You can't see it. You can just see the spire. So you can just see the spire. You can see a couple of feet or so underneath it, and then everything's blocked out. You can't see the land to the left. You can't see the land to the right. Okay, well, that isn't Earth curve, because I'm in the same spot. I'm at the same elevation above actual sea level. I've got plenty of footage of seeing stuff and plenty of footage of inferior mirage. Now, that cannot be Earth curvature. And that's not just, I've got other stuff that do this, but this is just killer because they can't come back from that. And yesterday was a turning point, really, because I haven't really debated a globe for perhaps 6 months. Debated one yesterday, and in my opinion, I quite humbled him. He didn't have an answer to the stuff that I was bringing out. I've got that video on my channel, and essentially he's there agreeing with me. He's one of the hierarchy of globe earthers, on YouTube, and he's there agreeing now that the inferior mirage is blockage. It isn't Earth curve, but it does hide the bottom of things, and he's actually on there admitting it now, and he's saying that it's now a well-known globe Earth belief now that obviously the inferior mirage hides things from the bottom. It's like, where did this come from? 12 months ago, 18 months ago, that was never the case. It was always, when you see the inferior mirage, that was where the curve starts. Now apparently their position has changed, as far as I can see from the work that I've been doing on this horizon, and putting so much data out there that they can't deny it. They have to now admit it. And they now say, yes, okay, so the inferior mirage can hide the bottom of stuff. Definitely.
Well, it's a win. There you go.
Definitely a win.
Definitely a win, and congratulations. And my hat's off to this person, Defender of the Globe. I mean, somebody that is willing to admit this. It's not a religious thing. Then, if you're willing to say, all right, you make some valid points, and when you show the same. Point the camera in the same direction and show different times of day and different atmospheric conditions. That's where you're showing that look, nothing is changing. I mean, the spire isn't moving up and down.
Well, that's the thing.
We just can see, sometimes we can see less of it because of the ambient conditions.
Well, that was the good thing, you see, having this spire that's 4 miles away and the buildings behind it. And then I was able to pan across to the left, see the inferior mirage, do the same thing on other days, see the spire, see the buildings, see there was no relative change between them, pan across to the left, and then see complete flatness. This was perfect for showing that the buildings aren't looming, so it's not floating. It's not floaty land like they used to say when you see these inferior mirages. It's not floaty land. It's not looming, and the buildings isn't moving. The post isn't moving. The same relative position. So you can literally take each observation and compare them, see that they're all the same, except for you've got blockage on one and no blockage on the other. And the blockage cannot be caused by Earth curve because the tide was too low. There was no reason for any curvature other than it just had to be blockage. It had to be blockage by atmosphere rather than Earth curve. And literally that simple. And it's a case of putting that to them, getting it through over and over again, testing these guys, showing at them repeatedly, over and over. Eventually, they have to back down from their position of saying that's Earth curve, because no, we can provide proof that the inferior mirages happen atmospherically.
Exactly. It was easy, 18 months ago to say, hey, you can't see it, and that's because it's blocked by water, by the Earth. That it's just too far away and it's dropping down below the Earth curve. That's one thing that we obviously don't ever observe as well, is that you would, if you're looking over a body of water, you should have to, maybe incrementally, but you should have to look down a little bit. If something is dropping due to a curve, then we should have to look down. But again, the tops of the buildings that we observe, no matter what the atmospheric conditions are always at the same level, Again, and that's why a time lapse over a course of time is perfect, because you can see that the tops don't change. It's just a matter of the atmospheric conditions affecting the bottom layer and how much of that is going to be blocked by that. So based on your experience, all these observations you made, all the time you spent out over the water, what are the ideal conditions when it comes to the weather and that sort of thing, time of day, time of year? What have you found to be the best to be able to see, as clear as possible?
Well, you don't want a really humid day, because when you've got evaporation happening, you've got those little particles of water that are traveling up from the sea, and they're like the little droplets of reflective material. So it causes a big inferior mirage. So when you see that, when you see this, so it's like a water layer on top of the water. So you've got the evaporation happening. So let's say in the first meter or so of water, as the evaporation starts, some of the particles fall back down. The rest of it makes it to clouds. Yeah, so we know that happens. But let's say in that first meter, we're looking across that, and what we're seeing is a buildup of water. It's a water layer that isn't actually on the water, and that's where you get the inferior mirage. So don't go out when it's really humid. You want to go out on nice dry days. You want to go out when the sun's out. The sun has to be out. It has to be bright. It has to be well lit. That's another thing I would say. And relatively calm. And one other thing I've found is probably about 2 days after the full moon, funnily enough, is the best conditions to go. 2 days before the full moon, forget it. You've got winds, you've got terrible weather, terrible visibility. So if you look at objects, distant objects, towers, building, mountains, grass, the grass is a different color. It's not as vibrant and bright a couple of days before the full moon. Full moon happens 2 days after the full moon or so. The next day, 2 days after, 3 days after, the colors are all back. Everything's bright and vibrant. It's like the atmosphere is being cleaned in some way, and you just seem to, and everything seems to calm down, and you can just go out, and there's very little wind, and that's my experience of how it's been for the past 18. So definitely time.
Interesting. I have not. Yeah, that's an interesting theory, if you will, that the lunar cycle has something to do with the ability to see clearly or not.
I put it down to cleanse it. It's the way I'm seeing it is, it's like when the full moon happens, it seems to cleanse the atmosphere. That's the way I see it, and I can't explain it, and it makes no sense to probably your listeners now are probably laughing at me. But that's fine, because I've been laughed at this entire time. Everything from the first
these are observations you've made. This is a repeated observation. If this just happened once, you'd chalk it up to coincidence. But you're seeing a pattern here. It appears you're out there so much, and you're obviously knowing what time of year it is, what time of the month it is, and it's interesting that more often than not, after a full moon, a few days after, typically you're going to be able to see better. There's a pattern.
Yeah. Well, let's face it. I mean, for the most part, I've been ostracized on flat Earth until recently. I mean, I'll be honest. You first looked into my work about 9 months ago. You got in touch and told me that I was your new favorite flat earther. I still remember that message. I was very privileged to get that, and it
Well,
meant a lot.
I loved all that stuff. I mean, it's great because that's what I did. I cut out there with the camera, and I don't live by the coast, so I don't have the opportunities you do. And I just love that you got the camera out and you were just
Well,
cranking out video after video. So I was like, dude, this, if you're not paying attention to what this guy's doing, everybody, you need to clue in. This is some good stuff.
well,
That's
the
how.
reason I say I felt like I was ostracized was it was because I was showing, in their opinion, in everybody's opinion, globe Earth proof. I was showing inferior mirages. In their opinion, I was showing blockage. I
I
was
see.
showing, I was showing all this stuff that was once the globe Earth proof and claiming it as flat Earth proof. And all it needed was more data, more data, more data. I'm telling people that I know what I'm seeing, I can figure it out. Other people weren't seeing it at the time. Now everybody seems on board with it. Everybody seems to, know, accept it, which is the good thing. That they seem to accept that the inferior mirage is atmospheric blockage. Other people are going out and doing the same sort of research now. I was the first one, I think, to do it. Might not have been. I don't really know. It's weird. You seem to get segregated in flat Earth. You don't get promoted by other channels in a way that there's probably guys in Australia that are doing stuff, but we don't know about this because the YouTube algorithm keeps us apart from these, and we never find each other. And there could be somebody down there doing this research just like me, and we've never heard of them,
Yeah,
and
potentially.
they've never heard of me or whoever. And but yeah, so yeah, it was difficult when I first started on this, and to actually take their proofs in inverted commas and change it from being a globe proof to a flat proof is essentially what's happened recently, and it's been really good. It's been a good journey.
It's been a great journey, I'm sure, to spend as much time as you have and then to get to a point where they're saying, yeah, you know what, there's some validity to what you're saying here. I can see that, and intellectual honesty hopefully will take over. You've never been one to shy away from engaging directly, and I think anybody that goes on the goes on the debate channel, Nathan's debate channel, obviously you're going to be engaging, with defenders of the globe. Some of them very adamant defenders of the globe. Tell me a little bit about what that's been like. Just I wouldn't say face to face, but just right there, having a conversation with somebody that believes that we live on
Yeah.
a ball flying through space, a spinning ball flying through space.
Well, the way I look at it is that everybody's programmed differently, and it's how your programming happens as a child growing up, what kind of level of indoctrination you've had, how you've grown up, all that kind of stuff. So you get people that come on that have been to university and they've studied sciences and stuff like that. These guys, you're never going to ever change their mind on this. You're never going to say to them, look, this is what we found and it's something different. They're always going to believe it. They've been taught it. It's their profession. They love it. They think that they know, even when they're faced with pretty obvious, counter arguments for what they've put forth. And then you also get people that are just too into, they just can't. They want to believe in Star Trek. They want to believe in Star Wars and all that kind of stuff. And we went to the moon and played golf on there and drove around in a buggy. They want to love all that.
I have to tell you, as a big, and I mean I still am at some level, but before I kind of woke up to this reality about us being lied to about the shape of the world and the nature of the world. One of the biggest Star Wars fans you'll ever meet, and truly,
Me too.
truly, this has ruined it for me. I don't have the
Yeah.
same love for it. I still see it as some entertainment and that sort of thing, but at the end of the day, I never see any of those movies the same again. So I'm disappointed for that aspect. But yeah, I can see people don't want to let go of that. That's just it's they define themselves by some of those things, and you've basically come up and said the opposite, and
Yeah.
it's a tough pill to swallow.
I'm finding also that there's new channels popping up left, right, and centre. They are getting promoted quite heavily. So, they're getting an awful lot of subscribers. My channel has had minimal growth in the past, say, month or so. I've put on, I think, maybe 50 subscribers. It's very, very slow going. But if you become an anti-flat earther, so if you start a new anti-flat earth channel, within 3 months you can have 5, 6, 7,000 subscribers. It's ridiculous the growth that you get in promotion for being anti-flat earth. But flat Earth is censored so badly, it's really difficult to get in traction. And that's how I felt that things have changed. I mean, it seems now that there's more globe Earth rhetoric put out there than flat Earth for sure. You know, I mean, there's more of a debate going on than research at the moment. That's another thing that I would like to say. Just
Yeah.
seems that way.
Yeah, and I agree, and I haven't been one to really get into the debate scene just because when I first was kind of exposed to this and I was listening to some of the debates, it was the kind of the same things over and over and over again, and it was just you could say it's an echo chamber if you're just on the flat Earth side or just the globe Earth side, but I was seeing kind of an echo chamber in debates, and so I've always kind of been drawn more to people like yourself that are just out there publishing their observations. You know, saying
Yeah.
here's what I see. Here's the video that I took, so you can see what I saw, and here's the calculations. Now, you know, take it or leave it, but this is what I'm seeing, and that's the stuff that always has I've been drawn to. So, you know,
Well,
whatever your cup of tea is, but you know, hats off for you to kind of doing both because you have been you know, firsthand, single-handedly gone out there and made these observations, published it, and then been willing to go in and essentially sit down and say, let's talk about it.
yeah. And let me just say, I mean, one thing leads to another. And what essentially drew me to the latest research that I've gone into is how did the whoever's in charge first convince the general public that the Earth was a sphere? And if you go back, say, 400 years, it's it's my belief that people that had a telescope back then were probably just scientists who stargazed, or people that were on a boat, sitting in the crow's nest up at the top, or the captain. You know, very few people had any kind of optical device that they could see far. So it was all down to the eyeball. So the eyeball was as far as or how far can you see?
Yep.
And it turns out that there's a limit to what you can see with your eyeball. And it's very interesting data. If you've seen the video I put out yesterday about that specific point,
let's get into that because I want to make sure we broach that subject because that is a key component to understanding what we can see, what we can't see. You know, it's just ridiculous to say, well, if the Earth is flat, then how come I can't see? You know, how come I can't climb to? How come we can't see Mount Everest? You know, from anywhere on the plane. You know, but just understanding that there's a limit to our vision, that there's a vanishing point, and this gets into angular resolution, which I know you have done a lot of work around and are really good at explaining it. So, and you brought it up earlier. You know, we talked a little bit at the beginning of the show. If we live on a spherical Earth, the higher we go up, the better we should be able to see, right? Because we'd have to look down. But we should be able to see because we're getting up over the curve, so we should be able to see farther. And we can observe that I believe we live on a plane, but as you go up in elevation, we're able to see further as well. But not because we're seeing over a curve, but because we're increasing the angle to our eyeball. So expand on that, will you?
Okay, so if you had an ant with our type of eyeball, because obviously ants have different type of eyeballs to us to see differently, but if you had the same vision, so an ant has the same vision as us, and you put it on a 10-foot table, you know, it's not going to see very much around it. It's not going to see lots of different stuff. But if you get that ant and you raise it up and you put it on, you know, lift it up a foot, suddenly it can see the whole plane. You know, it doesn't mean just because you see them further, just because you raise up, you know, that it's on a globe. It happens the same on a plane. But what I found interesting through my research recently was that we have a limit to the human eye, how much we can resolve. And there's an angle, and it's a specific amount, a specific degree that we cannot see beneath. So that is 0.02 of 1 degree. So 0.02 or 1/50th of 1 degree. So anything below 1/50th of 1 degree, the eye cannot resolve it. Right. So if we lay on the floor and we lay on a flat surface, completely flat for 3 miles. So somebody's gone out and they've flattened an area of 3 miles completely, and you put your eyeball on the floor, and then you look straight across at somebody standing 3 miles away, right? You won't be able to see them because their angular size at 3 miles away, this 6 foot human at 3 miles away, is 0.02 degrees.
There you
That's
go.
his angular size. That's the
Perfectly
angular
flat
size of a
surface.
human.
So there's no curve, perfectly flat
Okay.
surface, but you still would not be able to see them because the angle of resolution would be too small.
However, the geometric drop, coincidentally, the geometric drop, not refraction, nothing like that, but just the geometry of the Earth, happens to be 6 feet over 3 miles, which also equates to the same resolution as the human eye. So you have a geometric drop of 6 feet over 3 miles, or if you put your eyeball on the floor and you look on a straight flat surface, you can't see someone that's 6 feet tall. So it's exactly the same. There's no difference. It's like, how's that worked out? Wow.
So once that was discovered, you could see that could kind of then lead into how
That could be
dis-
mistaken for curvature.
a deception could take place then because it would work. And like we talked about, everything kind of goes into three buckets, or we try to put everything into three buckets. Works on a flat Earth only, works on a globe Earth only, or works on both. And this is one that basically works on both because,
No, doesn't. Because if
correct
he
me,
was on a globe, if he was on a globe, right, and
yeah,
you had that human that was 6 feet tall, and he was on a globe and you stick your eyeball on the floor, that human would disappear at around about 2 miles, not 3 miles.
oh, okay,
Because not
got it.
only would, because half of him would go due to Earth curve,
There you
but then
go.
the rest of him would go to the angular resolution of your eyeball.
So you
So
got
you
both.
so you
Yeah.
wouldn't be able to see him at 2 miles. In fact, you would have to have a 12-foot human that's 3 miles away, and even then you'd only just see the very top of his hair. So you would actually lose 12 foot at 3 miles if you stick your eyeball on the floor, because not only is he already dropped around the curve, but then you've got 6 feet that you can't see because of your human eyeball.
Got it. Perfect. No, yeah, thanks for correcting me. That makes sense. And so we have to take into account both perspective and well, the limit of our vision, angular resolution. All of these things are have to be taken into account. So, all right, let's hit pause one more time, Ranty. We're coming up on the break. This has been awesome. I want to get into a couple other things. I want to expand on the angular resolution stuff because I think when it comes to really trying to explain what we see, we have to take into account perspective and angular resolution and the atmospheric conditions. There's so many things that go into making long distance observations. I want to kind of bring it all down and then talk about what's next on your plate. So don't go anywhere, guys. I hope you're enjoying the show tonight. Ranty Flat Earth and Paul on the Plane here on Truth Frequency Radio. We'll be back again in about 3 minutes. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Paul on the Plane Live here on Truth Frequency Radio. Continuing my conversation with Ranty Flat Earth, we've covered a lot tonight. Long distance observations over water, some very, very great distances. We've been talking about angular resolution and atmospheric conditions and all of these things that come into play and things that we have to understand how these things work when we are making these observations and then coming up with an explanation of why we can see what we see, why can't we see this, and all these things. So, Ranty, it's been a pleasure so far, really getting to kind of break some of this stuff down with you. We appreciate you walking us through it. Let's continue kind of where we left off right at the end of the last break. And that was, we were talking about angular resolution. We were talking about, and I really love the example. If you take the eyeball and you set it on a perfectly level flat surface, no curvature over 3 miles, and what we would see with the limit of our vision, kind of take it from there, because when we talk about a globe Earth, we've got to contend with something at 2 miles, even before that. So kind of explain what you were talking about there.
Okay, so essentially I'm saying the curve counts have hijacked perspective. That's the whole thing.
Yeah, exactly.
I can go into things with the compression issues, for instance. I filmed a boat at different stages on its journey, saw a different amount of compression happening on the lower parts of the boat, reversed the curve calculator by angle, height, etc., and found that it matched the globe. And it was like, come on. And then all I did then is I re-engineered the image, and by instead of I didn't compress it in width, I compressed it in depth, like I was getting in the imagery, and it matched perfectly. It's just like when you see this compression, all you're actually just seeing is a compression of the boat due to the viewing angle, and obviously the weather conditions on the day that helps. But going back to the what you were saying about the f-stop values. So f-stop value, you've got your various disks. So each Aries disk is the data that's collected in a certain, well, it's just data, and it tries to fit into a pixel. It becomes out of focus when it starts to encroach on the nearest pixel next to it. So when you have an Aries disk that is touching another Aries disk, right? When it's touching, and each pixel is touching like that, that's when it's become, well, actually halfway, it's diffraction limited. So with the human eyeball, that's 0.02 of a degree. However, diffraction starts before that. So that's where some of the information is spilling over into the nearest pixel, and the nearest pixel and the nearest pixel, and all the pixels are starting to get jumbled up. So you can increase that that degree that you can't see through by probably another 0.02 degrees, because what you get in there is you're getting jumbled information, and then you're getting a complete loss. So the human eyeball can't see anything lower than 0.02 degree, but then you also get loss of information and jumbled up information at 0.04 of a degree. And then when you actually get out of that area and you get to a wider viewing angle, that's when your eyeball can start to make things out and see things, right? So there is a loss of information that also needs to be taken into account. And that's all down to the f-stop values or the aperture value of your camera, etc., things like that. So that's why you can adjust settings, etc. And what we're finding is that when we're going back to the 400 years ago, let's say, when they were telling about the globe is a, the Earth is a globe, people didn't have optics to go out and check for themselves. Yeah. So now that we can do that, and we can go out and we can see far further than we should do with things like the P1000, P900 telescopes, all that kind of stuff, even binoculars, we're finding that we're seeing further. So the globe needs to counteract this with some kind of magic, saying that things will miraculously, light will curve around the Earth and make it look flat. I mean, come on, really? Like, everything we're seeing apparently is a mirage. Everything is being loomed up, and nothing wherever. In fact, that's why, they say that, you could never shoot somebody. So if you were on a boat and there was another boat 5 miles away, right, and you had cannons and you were trying to fire at each other, and it was a day where there was a lot of refraction going on, you'd never hit each other because you'd be aiming at the wrong place.
That's right. You'd be aiming at a ghost.
Yeah, you'd be aiming at a mirage. The boat would be 50 feet higher than it should be. You'd never hit it.
Yeah. Yeah, good point. Good point. And so that's one thing that, I think is important for people to understand. And this is something that I came across early in my research, was when people were trying to explain away, these observations by saying exactly what you are. This is looming or whatever, or the light is being bent around a curve. I haven't been able to find, and I'm assuming you haven't either, and this is probably the challenge for people listening, is any demonstration, in a lab, or, it doesn't have to be in a lab, but I'm just talking about in a controlled environment where you can take an object, right, and see it from behind the wall or behind a curve or something that, number one, is not distorted beyond belief, so you can make out what it is, and number two, that it's not inverted, that it's still the same side up. Now, I'm talking about a Fata Morgana. Yeah. Right. And that's where, we do see, if there's an inversion layer, you have to talk about different air temperatures, different layers of air and different temperatures, where you can see an object being lifted way up, but it's extremely distorted, and it's also upside down.
Yeah.
Right. And so to being able, we have no demonstration that we can point to, and there's nothing that we can reproduce in a controlled environment to show that an object could be lifted up from behind a wall or a curve or something, or some other barrier where it's not distorted, because we can see the building, across the water. Yeah. It's not distorted. We can see that that's the building. Yes. We can see the spire. We can see the lights. They're not distorted.
Yeah.
And the other thing is they are right side up. We don't experience anything upside down. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, if you're looking at, for instance, the New York skyline, or is it the Chicago skyline?
Chicago skyline.
Chicago skyline, yeah. So the guy that did the new wiki guy that did that video from there, or that image from there, what he's essentially looking over is an entire city from across a lake. And the entire city, right, is loomed up in perfect proportion. That's every single building, every single light, every single thing that's in that area is loomed up in perfect proportion. There's no distortion on any of it, right? Now, what that would mean is that the weather conditions over that entire stretch of water would have had to have been exactly the same.
That's
The
right.
same amount of wind, the same amount of air temperature, the same amount of just everything. Now, I know friends that live just 5 miles away. It's raining there, it's sunny here, right?
Yeah.
And that's just the way
And a
it
few
is.
degrees, if not more, of temperature difference. Weather
Yeah.
conditions being completely different. Yeah.
So what they're saying is that the conditions were so uniform on that day that it lifted the entire buildings up without any kind of distortion whatsoever. The chances of that happening are 1 in a billion. One
Yep.
in a billion, right? Because what would happen is you would have some of the building, if we did have looming, you'd have some of the buildings loomed up like so, and then the others would be lower, and then they'd be distorted and wavy, and we didn't see any of that. I
Yeah.
never see any
Exactly.
of this. I never see any of this. My footage is either seen and everything's uniform, or
Yep.
it's not. It's either blocked completely. You don't see it. And we've got atmosphere. That's the thing. We have atmosphere. It's in the way. We can't see forever. We don't have bionic eyes.
That's right. That was one thing that I remember early on when I was engaging, in this conversation with those that were adamant that we do live on a spinning ball flying through space, and they would ask things like, "Well, how come we can't see?" The ridiculous questions. How come we can't see Mount Everest from anywhere on the plane because it's the tallest point on the plane? And I'd say, well, why would you think that we? What do you think we have? Supervision. Binoculars for eyes or telescopes for eyes. We can't see that far. And just for the simple fact that perspective, objects, and this is what I would say, that objects appear to get smaller the further away they are, right? So if you're
Yeah.
talking something that's 5,000 or 10,000 miles away, I don't care how big it is,
Mm.
you're not going to be able to see it, right?
Yeah.
Because it's gonna be very small.
Unless they're going to say that, oh, well, you can see the sun. Yeah, you can see the sun, and that's millions of miles across. Yeah, of course it is. Yeah, and it's millions of miles away. It's 93 million miles away. Of
93
course it
million
is.
miles away. Well,
you
very
know.
simply, if you're saying that the atmosphere doesn't have any effect, then I would say, well, just watch the sun or moon rise or set, because they appear to get larger
You do.
as they approach the horizon. As they're first coming up, the moon seems huge. When it gets up to on a full moon, and it's just rising, it seems very large. And once it's over your head, though, directly over your head, it seems a lot smaller than what you saw when it was rising. That's atmospheric effects.
Atmospheric lensing. That's
Yeah,
exactly what it is. It's atmospheric lensing, and it happens every day.
it happens every day.
Yeah.
Well, hey, we've only got about 15 minutes left in the show, but I want to talk about what's next. I mean, obviously, you're not stopping, and you've been brawling a little bit. I know you got some broken ribs right now, so you've been taking on the Globies, right? No, I know you had some time to do some research. What's next? What can we expect from Ranty down the line here?
Well, I've had a bit of a bad luck recently. I'll be honest. I have. I was talking to you before we went live. I said I had flu. Then I got chest infection, and it ended up with pleurisy. And then I was coughing so badly, I actually fractured a rib. So I've not been able to work for 5 weeks. And in the meantime, when I had flu, so 5 weeks ago, I'd taken a week off work to go on to Scotland. I intended to do some observations up there. I actually did do some, even though I had the flu. And on the way back, car blew up, basically.
Oh my
So I
gosh.
had a massive expense to that. That was the same week that we were moving into our new house. So I'm now in a new house, as you can see. This is my new place. So a
Very
lot has
nice.
gone on. A lot has gone on recently, but a lot of things have changed for me. So a lot of things have changed recently. It wasn't like it was when I was able to do all this research last year and all the stuff that I've been doing constantly. Because now I have a different set of priorities. So I don't know how much work I'm going to do going forward because financially things have changed. So it's like I was able to self-sufficiently support myself and my research for the past 3 years, basically. And now it's at the point where I now have bills to pay. I've got a mortgage to pay. I've got all this, life. I've got to work, unfortunately. And yeah, it's one of them. What's next for me? I wanted to look into all the tidal effects in different regions the salinity of the waters. You know, um, does having salt water under fresh water, does that make a difference to the optical effects as you're looking across that? Does that mixing that happens in the different layers of the water have an effect? The colder versus the warmer,
Yeah.
included with the tide, you know, with the tidal effects. All this kind of stuff, you know, I really want to look into that. Whether I'll get a lot of time to do it this year, financial constraints are literally probably saying no. But I'm still doing this stuff. You know, I'm just, I've got to be kind of uh, grown up about it now. You know,
No,
because
for sure.
let me just tell you, right, when I did this stuff last year, for instance, the whole year, um, I literally was taking so much time off work. I'm self-employed, so I was taking so much time off work to go and do this stuff. That I was spending 2 hours in the morning doing observations, doing a couple of hours work, then going on Nathan Oakley's debates in the afternoon for a couple of hours, and then going back and doing maybe another hour on someone's. I was doing maybe 3 or 4 hours of work a day, and I should have been doing 10 hours working. I was literally bumming off for the whole year. But I was so obsessed with flat Earth and doing all this research, and I hadn't realised just how much time and effort and things I'd put into it until I applied for a mortgage and got knocked back, and they said, well, no, you haven't earned enough money this year to get the mortgage that you want. And I was like, that caused massive issues with the missus. So I had to do a lot of work recently to try and make difference to that. So now I'm in it's just a different situation. I wish I had funding to do that, but I don't. So who knows?
So you're human. So what you're saying is, So what you're saying is you've got issues like everybody does. So you're human. It was super ranty. Now you're just ranty.
It was
No. I appreciate you sharing that because, and that's one thing I think people need to remember. Those of us that like to produce content, we're not independently wealthy. We don't just have gobs of money lying around and we can just do this, whatever. We have to find a balance.
Yeah.
And there's times when I've taken, many months off because, you have to prioritize things. Maintain relationships. You have obligations with work and financials and things like that. So we just appreciate the work that you've done, and glad you're able to do that. We all learned a ton along with you, and it was awesome. But we totally understand.
Yeah,
you've got to keep a balance. Got to keep it balance.
I've been on full go, literally full go for 3 years, and I've put 3 full years in, and I've still got the drive for it. Obviously, you can tell the passion in my voice. I've got things that I know I want to research, there's things I want to look into, there's things I'm desperate to find out myself because it's a personal journey, a spiritual journey. And I like showing the work to other people and seeing things change, which has happened quite recently, seeing the Globers change their opinion of where their original beliefs were to now looking at things differently has been a great move forward for us, as is understanding optics. All the things that we never used to talk about, we're now talking about, and we're not afraid to talk about anymore because it was the globe proofs. Now we've taken all that away from them, and it's humbling to be in that situation and have been a part of that. Absolutely, and I've still got the drive for it. So I've still got the P900, I've still got the P1000, still got the willingness to do that. I will say I have a Patreon. People want to support me if they want to see the research continue. They can find me on Patreon. If they want to help out a little bit, that would be great. It would give me the finances that I could justify putting into the research. Because it's like a research pot. Everyone needs finances to do a research. If Cancer Research UK and all that kind of stuff, they don't do it for, they have to have a research pot to do that. Well, unfortunately, my 3-year pot has dried out now. It's like, okay, well, now I need to sort of like say to the community, hey, look, if you like what you've seen, if you like the advances that I've done, the effort that I've put in, if you want to support me, support the channel, help me on Patreon, I'll carry on and I'll work hard and I'll keep bringing these enlightening stuff to you guys, because it seems like everyone's benefiting from it, but I can't do it for free. I can't afford to put petrol in the car all the time and take time off work like I used to. It's just basic economics, really.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up. I want to make sure that we, let folks know how they can help, how they can support, if they choose to. So, we'll be sure to put that Patreon link in the show notes, and in the video description and things like that. So, yeah, if you're listening, you've got a few extra dollars lying around. Hey, consider supporting some of this work. Go and check out some of the work that he's already done here, and love to see it continue because there's so much more we can learn. And it's not something that is just going to come by sitting in front of the computer. It's going out there with the camera, taking the measurements, making the observations, and in all these different and changing conditions. So thanks for bringing that up, and we definitely appreciate what you've done. And I really wanted to get into. I wanted to ask this question because you've made so many observations. You've been out there for years, essentially. Which one that you've published, so people can go check it out, which one do you think is just the best piece of evidence to say that there is no curvature, that there is no scientifically measurable curvature to the Earth?
Okay, well, last year, the past 2 years, when the illuminations have been switched on in Blackpool, I've decided to drive around England. So I had to get to this area where I need to go. I have to drive around England. It's like a 200-mile drive or 200-mile round trip. I can't recall which one, but it's basically to get to a distance around about 16 or 17 miles away from Blackpool. So once I'm at the other side of the ocean, so to speak, I've walked out at night time with a camera, P900, P1000, stool, windbreak, food. I even did a live stream from there, and I set up next to the water.
It was windy, if I recall. It was windy because that's what we could hear was the wind in the microphone. But yes, please continue.
So I'm getting out there. I'm down by the water. I'm looking across towards Blackpool. It's all, it's dark. The illuminations aren't switched on. Then all of a sudden, Blackpool just lights up. And I was filming the concert in front of the Blackpool Tower, which at that point was only around about 35 to 40 feet above sea level. Well, 100 and odd feet should have been gone to Earth curve. And here I am looking across this water from a massive distance, looking across, seeing the band play. Well, not seeing the band play, but seeing the lights of the band, because it's flashing all over the place. You know where it is, right in front of the tower. You can see all this stuff going on.
We've already established you can't see a 6-foot human being from that distance, right? Just from angular resolution, but you could definitely see, and probably hear, maybe too. I don't know. I mean, with the way, maybe it wasn't so windy because we know that sound travels so well over water because there's nothing obstructing it, and it's just bouncing off the water. But being able to see the lights, and how far again was this?
Well, it was at least, I think, I can't recall off the top of my head now, but it was maybe 17 miles, something like that. I do recall, though, that I knew for a fact, after I worked all the curve calculators out, that the base of the tower, so you've got the tower ballroom, which is a building, and on top of that, then you've got the tower that was all lit up. So the very base of the tower was the cutoff point. That's where the curvature of the Earth should have blocked everything out. So anything that you saw beneath that was like, that shouldn't have been seen. And it wasn't just that I saw it right in front of the tower. I saw it the whole way across. Everything that you could see. I could see rides. I could see the big one. I could see the mirror ball. I could see the street lights. I could see the street lights at 3 miles further down the road from Blackpool. It's like ridiculous amount of distance that we're seeing all this stuff. That was a great observation. So if you want to go and see that, yeah.
That's awesome. What's the name of the video? People want to look that one up.
Oh,
put you on the spot. I'll tell you what, send me the link for it. I'll make sure I'll include that as well. So
yeah, okay.
I know it's on your channel, but it's absolutely buried because you uploaded so much since then as well.
That's a long time.
That was a lot of videos ago.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, we'll definitely get that for those folks listening that would like to check that out. We'll definitely be able to link that up. So, hey, Shane, it's been a pleasure to catch up with you. Last time we spoke, I think we were talking about Tartaria. So we were talking a little bit about that with Martin, but I'm glad we just had a couple of hours here just to talk flat Earth and talk about some of these observations you've made. So you've made a great contribution to the body of work on this resurgence in a truly a scientific approach, scientific observational approach to our world. And I think everybody would agree with me that the work you've done has been second to none, and it's been really enlightening. And nobody's worked harder, I think, at showing and displaying what we actually can see in your part of the plane where you live. So just a huge thanks, I think, is in order.
Well, here's just one thing I want to leave you with is that my research that I wanted to do on tides and stuff. When you get in touch with somebody, a professor that actually researches specifically tides, and they email you back and they agree that yes, you do get localized bulging, and you realize that every landmass in the world where we reside has tidal effects around it. So if everywhere around it is having a localized bulge, not caused by Earth curvature, bearing in mind, but does have localized bulging or vertical displacement of water, then you are never, ever, ever going to see the Eiffel Tower from New York.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so we've got perspective and angular resolution. We've got atmospheric conditions. We've got the tides moving in and out that are going to affect things. There's so many things that have to be taken into account. So just to say, hey, how come I can't see Japan from the coast of west coast of California, the west coast of the United States? It's ridiculous. So if you're listening to this and you're throwing those kind of questions out to somebody that's defending a flat Earth model, think twice. You're just looking foolish. You got to go out there and do the research. So, hey, Ranty, thanks again. It's been a pleasure. Look, I have a feeling you're going to be out there again soon, and we're going to see some more videos. So I know you're going to find a way to get some of this stuff done. So enjoy a little bit of time off, heal up, and just know that we're all in support of you here. So we'll get that Patreon link out there, and I think we'll snag a few folks that are willing to throw a few. What do you say? You call them quid, right? A few quid.
Yeah, a few quid for a bit of petrol, would help out. Thank you very much. It would.
All right. Thanks again, Ranty. It's been a pleasure. We've been listening. You've been listening to Paul on the Plane live here on Truth Frequency Radio. So we're going to wrap up. Ranty Flat Earth is what he's known on YouTube. And definitely go check it out. Again, Nathan Oakley debate channel. I assume you'll be popping in there every once in a while as well to kind of keep tabs on things. So thanks again for your time. We really appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
You bet. All right. Well, we'll wrap up here. You're listening again to Truth Frequency Radio. So that will do it here. Episode 52 of Paul on the Plane Live. Should be back live next week. Be back from my trip overseas. So look forward to speaking with you guys again at that point. And as always, Strange World with Mark Sargent is next. If he's I think he's still in New Zealand, so it'll probably be a guest host up next. Anyway, thanks again everybody for listening. Enjoyed it. Hope you had a good time listening to this conversation about flat Earth with Ranty and myself. And be back next week with another live broadcast. So take care. Good night, everyone. Keep it flat.